Welcome to the Serenity Wealth Now show with Chris Cooper. This is not your typical financial show. As a CPA, licensed insurance agent, and investment advisor, Chris brings the financial conversation to life, where the numbers really matter. Every week, Chris sits down with someone from the community to find the financial lessons hiding in their story. Now, here's your financial friend, Chris Cooper.
All right, folks, good morning. So we've got very special conversation coming up with a member of my special community with Fortis Capital Advisors. I've got Rob Hagg in the studio with me remotely. How are you, Rob?
I'm great, Chris.
Well, we've got an interesting story to talk about today. We talk often, Rob and I, about just, we're both financial professionals, and so we talk about how the financials impact your family, your community, your livelihood, all of those things. And we put plans in place to help the community all the time. But every now and then our personal lives and our professional lives intersect and create some interesting dynamics. And so Rob and I have spent lots of time talking about the importance of retirement planning, long-term care planning, and really making sure we get our ducks in a row for potential concerns and the what-ifs that happen in life. And long-term care planning specifically comes up in these conversations often. We don't like to talk about it, but we need to talk about it. And Rob has an interesting story to discuss that impacted his family on this subject. So I thought, you know what, we need to get this in and talk about it and make sure that the community can know as a whole, because there's a great lesson to learn here.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So Rob, feel free, speak up, bud. Let's share.
Chris, it is an interesting story. It's one of those things that, like you, had been an advisor for a really, really long time. And so I took the leadership roles that I have in our RIA and focused on growing our advisors and growing the firm. But you still have that experience how you've helped people from a planning standpoint, and even more importantly, how you help your family. And it's interesting when you think about your clients, as much as we care about them, our job is to dehumanize the process.
Right.
And you still have to take that, objective view, quantitative view, dehumanize it, and factually approach it. What was interesting is I've never had to try that experience of dehumanizing with my own family. And that's kind of where this discussion started, and how you and I talked about it when my father called me about, wanting to explore some of these community care communities or life retirement communities, whatever they may be called.
Yeah. So I wrote a blog on this a little while ago, and they're continuing care communities, continuing care retirement communities. There's a lot of different names for them, but essentially it's bundling and packaging a retirement community with continuing care throughout to be potentially a solution for potential long-term care concerns.
For sure.
Right?
Well, it's almost like it's a plan for someone that didn't make a plan. But it's a really expensive plan. And, my father's situation was different. He's 73, plays golf 6 days a week, extremely in great health. I sold him a long-term care policy, probably 15 plus years ago, something that won't even exist on the marketplace now because of all the bells, whistles, and benefits. But my stepmother, who is 10 years older than him, wasn't able to qualify for long-term care at that time. And so, that's where this conundrum kind of came about of we had him taken care of, but they started thinking about, well, what about her with not having long-term care? They started exploring those options. And that's where I got introduced, more intimately into these continuing care retirement communities than I ever had been outside of just, hearing about them from friends that had parents exploring them, or just the marketing that we see all the time on them.
Well, yeah, and they market themselves not as really, independent living or assisted. They actually do market themselves more as independent living, but think more luxury resort style.
Sure.
Independent living,
sure.
Right? It almost feels like you're a sandals every day.
Yeah, and that was definitely the type of community they were looking at. My father had done a great job of saving, and was very successful in his own right. Had this beautiful home. There was his dream home. Built it years and years and years ago. Paid it off. Probably 15 years ago. And one of the things I would definitely say is it's way too much house for that. They don't need that.
Sure.
And that was one of their arguments. But so I got the phone call, and my dad said, "Hey, Dee and I are looking at this. I want to get your thoughts and hear me out. This is the way they work. And so he started explaining, the condos, and you get to design them, and they haven't been built yet, and they're roomy and they're nice, and all the amenities that come with it, and that guarantee that, okay, well, when you need a few more hands, you've got hands on deck that are right at your service. When you need a lot more hands on deck and you need to migrate into that full assisted living, you're on property, and you're never going to run out of money. And I said, wow, this is a really interesting concept. Walk me through the financials of it. And that's where things started to get really interesting to me. And it took a lot of deep, maybe uncomfortable conversations that I had to dehumanize. But yet I would tell them, hey, I'm putting your son hat on right now. You're my dad. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to humanize it for a second, but now I had to flip. And so it's an exercise that a lot of people are going through. And I think as advisors, it's how do we position it? If we truly don't feel like it's the right financial move for them, how do we do it in an objective way, create the understanding? Because they do a really good job of getting the hooks in you. You better sign up now. You're on a wait list. You hope you can get this design because it's going fast. When you turn a certain age, we may not take you. And it creates this fear mongering of almost, taking advantage of a predatory approach and saying, you better write this really big check, probably the biggest check you'll ever have written in your life for one single thing.
Yeah. Well, there's a fear of missing out angle that they're playing, right?
100%.
And it almost feels like a timeshare pitch in so many different ways.
Yeah. I mean, you said that to me when we were having just kind of our normal weekly conversation. And it's the timeshare of 2026. And there's a lot of people that, look, it is for a lot of people, but it's also not for a lot of people. And there's definitely a decision-making process that we can help our clients go through, or our family members go through in this case.
Well, and I think that's the interesting thing, right? As an advisor, our role is really to educate on the good, the bad, and the indifferent, right? Be factual, understand pros and cons, because there are many very good positive aspects of this. One of the things that these communities offer is a great social atmosphere, right? There's a great aspect of that, and that does keep you young. It keeps your mind young, and it does keep you in a more social atmosphere, which does tend to help overall your well-being, for sure. That's a great benefit that these communities can offer.
Yeah. No, I agree. But, there's also a lot of other things that you can add in your life or increase in your life that do the same exact thing. And frankly, Chris, I mean, you're a lot like me. I love my neighbors. I love my community. But I also love getting away from them too. And it's not because they make me uncomfortable. It's also sometimes nice to lift yourself into another spot that it's not the same people you see at the grocery store. It's not the same people you see at your country club. It's not the same people you see at the gas station. It's different. And so for the investment you have to make in these types of communities, you can put yourself in a lot of really neat spots, but then migrate yourself back to your neighbors as well.
Absolutely. And you know what? We always want control. We want to maintain control. We want to have control, and we want to plan for our own control. It's why the long-term care planning conversation is the hardest one to have, right? I always talk about things like we know we're going to pay taxes, right? And no one wants to pay taxes. So we're always willing to have that conversation about paying lower taxes today, in the future, all throughout our lives, right? So that's an easy conversation to have. We also know we're going to die sometime, so we're happy to plan for our own passing away. We're happy to plan for our own legacy because we want our monies to go to our children or a charity of choice. Easy conversation to have. But when we talk about long-term care planning, it's so much more challenging because we don't want to think about our inability to make decisions on our own. We don't want to think about losing our capacity to have control of our lives.
For sure.
Scary.
Well, and the generation that's being most affected by this is singular, maybe one of the most impacted generations of all time. We referenced it, 20 plus years ago as a sandwich generation. It's when their parents were still alive, the savings, the long-term care weren't at the levels that they are today. And they were, and that boomer generation, their parents were dependent on them for care, or they were bringing them into their home. And at the same time, they had kids that they were dependent on them, that they were going to college, that were going to different schools, that were playing sports, and they were sandwiched. And they didn't ever want to be a burden like their parents were to them. And so many of them saved, many of them did long-term care. And in my father's case, like I told him and my stepmother, I said, off the table, you'll never be a burden on anyone in this family. You're financially in a spot, you will never be in a burden. And frankly, don't talk about inheritance. Don't talk about leaving money. The best estate plan in my mind is bouncing your check to the funeral home. We'll take care of that one. Right?
Yeah.
And so when you think about it like that, it's a very selfless approach that they take of, I want to make sure that I'm ever dependent on anybody. And if that wasn't part of the conversation, that's where I really wanted to drive home the point that I didn't feel like they were going down the right path by making this decision.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when we talk about the options for care, first of all, the reason that these communities are getting so much more hype is because the level of care needs are growing. We're living longer lives, and we need more assistance as we get older, and we have a higher aging population than we've ever had. 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every single day, and that's going to continue to take place, and we're going to continue to see these numbers escalate, and our society is not built to necessarily have this kind of demographic. We're just not there for it. We don't have the housing needs for it. That's why there's a service problem in the industry as well, and it's creating challenges for sure.
Right, and you talked at the top of this about having options, and that's why everybody does what they do. And I feel like you start to limit the options. So I'll tell you kind of in this scenario where things started to getting uneasy for me. We were talking about, okay, they probably need to downsize, sell their house. They got a beautiful house, and whatever the number was, they were able to put a decent sum. They're going to put a very nice sum of money in their pocket. But in turn to do what they were going to do, they would sell their house. Then they had options. Did they want to write a check for $600,000? Did they want to write a check for $700,000? Did they want to check for $900,000 and above? And based off of those things, one, it was the discount you got on assisted care. It was a possibility of a percentage if you didn't run out of money while in assisted living, that a percentage of that down payment would go to your estate. But you didn't own anything anymore. And so in this scenario, I said, okay, you write this check for $900,000, not much, if any, that would probably come back to the estate. You have no assets. If you don't go into assisted living, there's nothing that comes out of it. And if you do go in, there's no cost of living levelization. You're paying for, in that scenario, you get a slight discount on what care would cost on the open market.
Right.
But at the same time, that person that's in care is paying a discounted cost. But the person that's living in their residence or their condo is still paying every month as well. And so what I couldn't figure out is how it made sense.
Yeah. Because you're putting a down payment on. So it's kind of like paying off your house, like buying a house, paying it off outright, and then continuing to have a mortgage payment as well.
Yeah, what I said, when we went through this, and so what it took after several of these conversations, I felt like, one was on the fence and the other was just kind of accepting it. And the one that was on the fence was going to go whatever direction the other one went.
Sure.
But I felt like I was starting to get through in the analysis. So I actually flew in for the day to Chicago. They were having an open house. It gave credibility because, look, I went, I saw it. I talked to the, leadership on property. I got to see the things they were looking at. But before we left, I said, and I'll just use, even numbers for this thing. I said to my stepmom, I said, I'll buy your house today. I'll write you a check for $1 million right now. But you have to then pay me $900,000 right back. And then you've got to pay me $120,000 a year. And if you do go into care, I'll take care of you. But you're going to have to pay half of the cost.
which is the discounted cost rate.
Right.
Right.
And she said, well, that doesn't seem like a very good idea. And I said, that is exactly the way we need to think about this. You're over doubling your living expenses. You're no longer holding a very large asset, and you lose the option.
Right.
And I said, it's great if you go into care, but if, let's just say, you stayed here and one day we woke up and you needed a few hands around, and then one day we woke up and said, wow, we need a lot of hands around. And if you went into full 24-hour assisted care at home, you would spend $600,000 less than what your down payment is.
Yeah. And that's cost of care at home 24/7, which is where most people would love to stay as long as humanly possible. Sure. Absolutely. Right. But there are great community care agencies that will come to your home and provide level of care, and you can escalate to 24 hours if necessary. And if it's at a point where it becomes, a fall risk or something where, more assistance is needed, that's when you have the ability to move more towards an assisted living or a memory care or those types of situations. But you have so many more options when you do it this way because you're not pigeonholed with your own assets being basically exposed.
100%. And so it was interesting. We had that conversation, and we walked in, and they immediately were looking. I could tell at the facility through a completely different lens.
Yeah.
And it became, well, I only want to show you these two floor plans. We may not be able to get the one we want. And by the end of it, it was, well, we wouldn't do this if we didn't get the one we want. And then it was, this is the last time we're going to be on this property ever again. And I said, okay, and I said, let's go through the numbers. We'll run Monte Carlos. We'll have our team really look at this. And now we'll give the factuals around it and what your chance of success is in each pathway. And it was great. The day that we actually went through all the numbers that Chris, our teams all developed, for me, and presented it. That morning, the care coordinator, or the whatever on-site care coordinator at the facility they're looking at, called my dad and said, all right, I'm ready to get you signed up. And he said, I don't think we're going to move forward.
Yeah.
And she was shocked. But when you start to look at the dollars and cents, it's not for everyone.
It's not for everybody. And quite frankly, you have so many more options that make much more financial sense. It is an interesting concept. There is some niceties with socialization that do exist. The level of care you would hope is better, but what if it's not? I mean, at least if you're in a care community where you can move, you still have control. And if you planned for it using the assets that, quite frankly, the expensive deposits cover, for a fraction of those assets, you can get a policy that's paid up that has the ability to cover that and more.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting is you think about this, and this is the morbid part, and it took me a while to be able to wordsmith the conversation until I realized that both of them were comfortable with the conversation. But I said, I said, let's look at morbidity and mortality tables. D, you're 10 years older. You're probably going to predecease or need care before my father. Bottom line.
Yeah.
And based off your age, this is what the numbers would say. And I said to my dad, I said, if you're still rocking 6 rounds of golf a week and you're feeling the same way, do you want to keep coming back here? Because guess what? You have no other options. There's no get out of jail free. There's no partial refund. You either leave everything you left or you put in, or you stay.
Right.
And that's tough.
And you'd also mentioned something else, that you had put a care plan in place for your father, but at an earlier age when he qualified.
Exactly. And that was the thing. We didn't need to worry about it for him.
So what happens? Does his policy provide any value in that community?
It saves him money on his discounted rate.
So will they take his policy as payment?
They will.
Should he need that assistance?
They will.
So at least they do take that.
And we confirmed that.
Quite frankly, yeah, good, because I've heard some other reports that may not be the case.
Correct.
So that's a good thing that they will at least take kind of that benefit. The challenge I have with that is you're already covered that. So then what are your assets really paying for at that point?
What
right?
It is that if you run out of money and all of your savings is gone, then they start dipping into your initial deposit, and you'll never run out at that point. But if you think about it, Chris, it's the lifelong insurance industry. It's risk pooling.
That's right.
If 100 people pay $900,000 and only 10% of the people use that whole $900,000, pretty good business model. And what is the likelihood of even 10% utilizing all of it?
That's right. They're creating their own self-insurance, self-pooled life insurance policy within the real estate environment.
100%.
So
good business model.
Packaged under a Sandals timeshare.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. It's crazy. But that's so, and you got to remember when you're having a conversation about long-term care, the time to have that conversation is not in crisis mode.
No,
because in crisis mode, the conversation is real. Like, it's so much better to have this conversation up front when you don't need care, when you're walking into a building and talking about it openly at a couch with your family and a professional, having conversations about, well, this could happen. I don't really want it to happen, but you know what? If we do need assistance, I'd really like to have some help at home. I'd like to stay at home as long as possible. Great. Let's plan for that. Having that control and that conversation well in advance where you can kind of joke about a very serious topic, it makes it a little bit more of a palatable conversation,
Well, it's funny. I'll never forget this. I actually brought the concept up to my dad. We would do Christmas Eve dinner at family, and it was always a great time. And we were down in the wine cellar having wine. I said, "It's time for you to get a long-term care policy." And he said, "Why? So you and your sisters don't have to take care of me?" I said, "Yeah, that's 100% why." And he kind of laughed. Reason. And he said, "Well, what do you think it would cost?" And I said, "I don't know. I think it costs this." He goes, "Well, let's explore it." And he admitted he remembered that conversation. He remembered right where we were, and said it's worth every penny he's ever spent on it to date.
Well, it's peace of mind, and quite frankly, all it really is repositioning your assets from one bucket to another. That gives you peace of mind, more efficiency, help burden that risk with some other with a pooled approach. But if you do it in advance, you have more options, more flexibility, and there's a tax advantage to doing it too, because a long-term care benefit paid out during care is typically, depending on how it's structured, so I can't say always, but typically considered a more tax advantage position, usually giving you a tax-free payment.
Yep. And, what's interesting is, that was 15 plus years ago when that policy went into effect. And if you think about the market, we saw this evolution of long-term care, and they were probably priced pretty wrong because now no one's in that business effectively like traditional. Yeah. But these lump sum policies, these annuity-like policies with these care benefits on them are even, I think, more beneficial because you gotta exit if you don't use care versus the long-term care that he's in. If you don't use it, you had a great policy.
Right. And that's great point here is that the old school policies, and I've heard a lot of people say, when they try to get claims, their parents weren't able to use them. They were very specific about what they would and wouldn't cover. And therefore there was a very difficult policy to have a payment on. Some of that can be true depending on who your carrier is. But the other thing is they typically escalated in price. And then there was another thing in there was that use it or lose it. It was essentially a term policy for long-term care. Yeah. And it did effectively bankrupt an industry. And many carriers, some of them very good carriers, just exited the market completely. And the biggest shift on that was when the state of Washington determined that you had to, as a resident of Washington, you had to have long-term care policy coverage. You had to. They forced it. Many insurance carriers said, that's it, I'm done. And they got out of it completely. They didn't offer solutions. And so there's less in the market than there were before, but they are a different breed. And they've transitioned from that use it or lose it approach. And you mentioned a great solution, which is an annuity-based solution. Some of these annuity-based solutions have lower underwriting requirements. You're lifting and shifting money that you already have from one resource to another with a more efficient approach to cover potential care concerns. And you know what? If you don't need care, okay, you still have a benefit that goes away at passing to your children or a charity of choice.
Yeah, I mean,
I have no problem with it.
100%. It is the repositioning, and I know, Chris, in your practice, it's a very big part of your conversation, utilizing those types of products because you want to plan for every aspect of it. The thing I think also is interesting, I talk to a lot of our advisors, your peers in our organization about this, is we have a responsibility to cover this piece as well.
Yeah.
Because the last thing you want is the next generation, when all of their inheritance has been gobbled up by care, by assisted living, and they say, well, why didn't you offer them long-term care? Well, I just didn't feel like it.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be able to say you did. Because I really think there is a long-term risk in our industry for those that don't cover all aspects of the plan.
That don't think about it, right? And I've heard people say, oh, you know what? You got plenty of money. You can self-insure.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. But you know what? Use your money more efficiently. Why would you not use your money more efficiently? If you have assets and you have enough assets to fund any long-term care incident, wouldn't you want those funds to be utilized in the most efficient way possible to cover that potential risk?
100%.
Of course you would,
100%.
right? Of course you would.
Yep.
The tax benefit alone is the one that I get tax geeky. I'm a CPA at heart, so I look at that one all the time. But the tax benefit alone is a tremendous value that is often overlooked in these planning conversations because they think you can just save your way into this with market related growth. And it's quite frankly not true. A long-term care event can decimate a portfolio faster than most market-related corrections.
100%.
So it's tough, and we need to have that conversation. And fortunately, within our network, we have a lot of great advisors having these great conversations, and we have a lot of great resources available to folks to make sure we have the right solutions in place as well. So.
Right. Well, and I think the one thing I kind of end my side of it with is that, for clients that are going through this, I don't know how many people are listening to this, Chris, and I know you've got a great following, but people that are going through this, there's two, the first people they're going to talk to is their family. Now, in my situation, I'm in this industry and it was a foreign side to me. So I had to integrate understanding the long-term care aspect of what you and I think about, since inception to this new wave. And so what I would really say to, any clients is it's not only about discussing this with your family, but it's about discussing this with your advisor because it does affect both your family and your advisor, and having a trusted resource that can help you maneuver it, dehumanize it, is super important. And that was the hard part for me because I was not only the family, but I was the trusted advisor in their mind. And dehumanizing it was probably one of the most difficult things that I had to go through.
Yeah. And I know I help my parents, and I'm my parents' advisor too. And one of the hardest things to do in that situation, knowing you're the beneficiary of assets, is to play that different angle and be like, hey, this is not about an inheritance situation. This is not about, looking out for that kind of stuff. But what is more important to you? Where do you want your money to go? I know the answer, and I know it happens to be me, but that's not why we're having this conversation.
Right.
We're having this conversation not to benefit me, to benefit what your objectives are. And it's a very difficult thing that as an advisor working with your family, you have to kind of understand.
For sure.
But Important conversation, folks. Long-term care planning, it's a big deal, and you have to have these conversations. You have to have them up front. You have to make sure you have them because your goals and wishes are what's most important. And that's true about any financial situation, quite frankly, but it's especially true when it comes to long-term care planning. So when you're ready for your own conversation, let's talk. Reach out. We're happy to have a conversation with you. And until then, feel free, follow us on social media. Check us out for more insights, information, and, of course, a little fun with finance along the way as well. So Rob, thanks for joining us today and sharing your story. We'll talk soon, bud.
Serenity Now!
Serenity Wealth Now can be found wherever you are at serenitywealthnow.com, on YouTube, Spotify, LinkedIn, and Facebook, and on NewsTalkSTL Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. When you're ready for your own conversation, schedule some time with Chris by visiting serenitywealthnow.com. That's serenitywealthnow.com.
Investment advice offered through Fortis Capital Advisors.